Chapter 31. The Builders of Air and Earth. Some of the most complex work on Earth is done without deliberation. A weaver bird builds a structure that, to human eyes, looks engineered. Fibers are threaded, tension is distributed, entrance points are shaped with precision. The nest hangs in space, resilient against wind and weight. It appears as though it must have required planning, diagrams, revisions, and doubt. Yet the bird does not sit back and evaluate its design. It does not take a day off because the first weave looked imperfect. It does not hold meetings with itself about whether it feels inspired. It repeats a sequence over and over, guided by contact and timing. A spider does the same in a different medium. It builds with air. It places lines, anchors them, tests tension, moves again. It does not mourn a broken thread. It does not spiral when part of the web collapses. It rebuilds. It does not need an emotional story about the collapse. It returns to the mechanics. The web is not an expression of identity. It is a function. The function is met through repetition. Ants build with earth. They move particles, they follow gradients, they respond to pheromone trails and changing conditions. Their structures scale into something that resembles architecture, not because any single ant has a blueprint, but because simple repeated behaviors compound into complexity. The system produces order through unburdened repetition. There is no internal debate about whether the mound is meaningful. The mound is built because building is what the system does under the given conditions. These examples can sound like a kind of insult to human intelligence. It is tempting to say that animals and insects are simple and therefore free from the burdens that complicate human effort. Yet what matters here is not the absence of consciousness, it is the absence of internal interference. The weaver bird still responds to conditions. The spider still adjusts to the environment. The ant colony still changes behavior based on pressure, temperature, and threats. None of these systems are rigid, they are responsive. What they do not do is inflate the work into a psychological theater. The work remains work. Human beings often turn work into something else. A task is rarely just a task. It becomes a test, a statement, a risk to identity. A person begins building and immediately begins judging the building, not in a practical quality control sense, but in a self-evaluative sense. They ask what it means about them if the work is slow, if the outcome is uncertain, if the first attempt is rough. They interpret friction as a sign that they are wrong or incompetent or not ready. The inner narrative enters, and then repetition becomes heavy. This is how humans lose one of their greatest capacities, the ability to build through unburdened repetition. Repetition is the true mechanism of construction, regardless of the medium. A nest is not built through a single inspired act. A web is not formed through one perfect decision. A mound is not created through one grand effort. Structure arises from accumulated placement. Each piece is small. The intelligence is not in any single move. The intelligence is in the continuity that allows small moves to stack into something stable. Human beings know this intellectually and still resist it emotionally. They want the work to feel clean from the start. They want early results to look like finished results. They want effort to be accompanied by confidence and clarity. When these feelings are absent, they hesitate. They revise too early. They abandon too quickly. They delay beginning because they imagine the beginning should contain more certainty than beginnings ever contain. The natural builders do not avoid beginnings because beginnings are messy. Beginnings are simply where the sequence starts. The weaver bird does not attempt to perfect the first strand. It places it, it tests it, it continues. This is not mindlessness. It is a kind of embodied intelligence that trusts the process of accumulation. The bird does not need to be convinced that the nest will be good. The bird begins building and lets the nest become good through the act itself. In this, the animal offers a corrective to one of the most corrosive human fantasies, that quality is achieved through internal certainty rather than through iterative contact. Contact produces information. Information produces adjustment. Adjustment produces quality. Emotional interference often blocks this chain. A person becomes tense and then tries to build while tense. The tension distorts perception. The work feels wrong. The person assumes the wrongness is in the work rather than in the state through which they are perceiving it. They stop. They overthink. They seek readiness. They attempt to stabilize themselves before returning. The time passes. The work remains unbuilt. The tension grows because the unbuilt work becomes a weight. The person then approaches the work with even more tension. The cycle deepens. The natural builders do not carry the work as an identity problem. They carry it as a function. Function allows repetition to remain light. Light does not mean easy, it means unburdened by surplus meaning. The bird strains its body. The spider risks exposure. The ants labor continuously. None of this is effortless, yet the effort is direct. It is not doubled by psychological negotiation. There is no second job happening at the same time, no ongoing evaluation of worth, no internal tribunal deciding whether the conditions are right for building. This is why their construction appears fluid. Fluidity is often misinterpreted as talent. In human work, people look at a master builder, a skilled writer, a disciplined operator, and assume they must have a special inner alignment that makes effort easy. They imagine that the expert is simply more motivated, more confident, more naturally focused. Often the difference is more structural. The expert has fewer internal obstacles to repetition. They have learned to build without turning each act into an emotional event. They have reduced the noise between action and continuation. When the noise reduces, repetition becomes possible without constant cost. This is the hidden advantage of emotional discipline. It is not merely that you remain calm, it is that you remain buildable. Buildable is the state of being able to return again and again without requiring a new internal justification each time. A person who is buildable can construct complex things through simple repetition. They can write a book paragraph by paragraph without needing inspiration at every page. They can develop a skill through slow practice without needing to feel progress every day. They can run a business through hundreds of small decisions without needing each decision to feel meaningful. They can build a marriage through ordinary acts without constant emotional intensity to prove love is real. This is how real structures are made, not through fireworks, but through repeated placement. The ant colony is perhaps the clearest example because the individual ant is so small relative to the structure produced. The complexity emerges from coordination and repetition, not from one single mind's grand plan. Human beings often sabotage their own capacity for this kind of emergence by overemphasizing vision and underemphasizing placement. Vision matters. Without it, direction is lost. Yet vision without repetition is fantasy. Fantasy becomes frustration because it demands results without the mundane sequence that produces them. The spider's web does not arrive as a concept, it arrives as a line placed, then another line, then another. The nest does not arrive as a dream, it arrives as fiber pulled through fiber until a shape holds. These builders do not wait for certainty that the structure will be perfect. They build until it is. Human beings often wait for a feeling that belongs at the end of the process. They want the calm of completion at the beginning. They want the confidence of mastery while still a beginner. They want the satisfaction of visible progress before they have done the invisible repetitions that make progress visible. When they do not receive these feelings, they interpret the absence as a sign to stop, or to reconsider, or to seek a different path. The natural builders do not seek different paths because the path is not an identity choice. It is the next action required by the environment and the body. This is not an argument for instinct over thought. Thought is one of our greatest tools. It allows planning, long-term coordination, collaboration across time, and the creation of systems that no animal can match. The problem is not thought itself. The problem is thought that interferes with repetition. Thought that turns the building process into a referendum on mood. Thought that multiplies the difficulty by adding narrative. Thought that demands emotional agreement before allowing the next placement. The quiet builders show that complexity does not require emotional complexity. Complexity requires continuity. Continuity requires return. Return requires that the mind stop treating each moment as a negotiation. When you watch a weaver bird, you do not see a creature arguing with itself. You see a creature absorbed in the mechanics of construction. The absorption is not mystical, it is simply undivided attention. The animal is not distracted by the question of whether the task is worth it. The task is worth it because life requires it. This requirement is not a motivational slogan, it is reality. Human beings have the strange privilege of choosing many of their tasks. This privilege comes with a risk, the risk of endlessly debating what should be done instead of building what has already been chosen. Choice increases narrative. Narrative increases friction. Friction makes repetition feel heavy. The solution is not to become unthinking, it is to become less burdened while thinking. To choose, then to build. To decide, then to place the next piece. To allow the work to be built through the same unglamorous process by which every structure on Earth is built. The builders of air and earth do not measure their progress emotionally, they measure it physically. A line holds or it does not. A weave tightens or it does not. A mound rises or it does not. The feedback is immediate and practical. Human beings often replace practical feedback with emotional feedback. They ask themselves whether the work feels right instead of whether the work is moving. They ask whether they are inspired instead of whether the next piece has been placed. This replacement makes construction unstable because feelings are unstable. Practical feedback, though imperfect, is steadier. It keeps the mind oriented toward what can be touched and adjusted. In the end, the nest is not built by a mood. The web is not built by confidence. The mound is not built by optimism. They are built by repeated actions that are small enough to be done and close enough to be verified. This is what unburdened repetition looks like. Simple, present, relentless, without being dramatic. Human work becomes more natural when it returns to this truth, not because humans should imitate insects, but because humans too are living systems that build through contact. When emotional minimalism is applied to the act of construction, the mind becomes less theatrical and more usable. It becomes capable of doing what living systems have always done, placing the next piece and then the next until something real exists where before there was only intention.